please join me in welcoming Len Amato.
Thank you, Josh.
Before we get into film and becoming an executive and a producer, what's your background? How did you get to New York, and what were you doing at CBGB's?
Born in Chicago, raised in Chicago, raised in the city. Went to a junior college there, went to a junior college for 2 years because I was the first year that when I graduated high school that there were no college deferments, so I didn't know if I was going to get drafted. They had a lottery system. And so I didn't really have money to go to a 4-year school, especially if I was going to have to leave after the first 2 years. So I decided a junior college was a good option for myself. I got a high number. Then I was looking for a school to get a bachelor's degree, and I found this crazy school, Columbia College in Chicago, which, yay, Columbia College, which was really an outlaw kind of school back then. I didn't even know it wasn't accredited. They had film classes in a couple of floors in a warehouse near the lake, and then they had dance classes in another part of the city, writing classes in another part of the city, and they believed that people who do it should teach it. And so I had a great 2 years there, plus I got a scholarship. Made some films there. They brought some great filmmakers in to talk to us. They brought the Maisel brothers in. They brought John Cassavetes. And it was very inspiring. And they basically stuck a Bolex in your hand, and they had you go out and start shooting and learning about editing and learning about all the things that you need to know, all of you know. I know there's a lot of filmmakers in the audience. Really giving you the fundamentals, teaching you about editing. We used to have to cut Gunsmoke episodes in Hawaii Five-0, and so that was a great time. And then I kicked around Chicago, and I was a musician, and I was doing some acting, and I was doing some writing. So these were all the things I was interested in. I directed a couple of films, and then eventually my girlfriend wanted to move to New York because she was a dancer. And she's out there now. She's now my wife, Diana. And so Diana had two other friends, and so I moved out to New York with 3 women who were dancers. And so that wasn't bad. And you know, our first apartment was on 99th Street in East Harlem. And well, you wanted to know how I got to La Mama and all that. So
Yeah, I mean, did you go?
I was playing music, and what really happened was there was a person that I knew from Columbia was going to do a feature film, an independent feature. He wanted to use my songs. He wanted me to act in it. I had to put a band together to record the songs for the movie. And of course, the money fell through for the movie, but I really liked having a band. So I kept remnants of the band together, and I stopped doing film completely. And then started playing with this band. And that band went through some iterations. And then simultaneously to that, there was a director and a writer who wanted to develop a show about Buddy Holly. And you know, there weren't these Broadway shows about Buddy Holly at that time. And so we had to put a band together for that. We got all the instrumentation that was completely authentic. And it was, you know, we did Buddy Holly's music, and we did monologues where each of the musicians was Buddy Holly, and that ended up going to Europe, and that was a show that premiered at La Mama. And then with the band, I played at various clubs in New York at that time, Danceteria, CBGB's, things like that. So that was you know, they say it was a golden era, but it was the early 80s, and I was a waiter for 4 years trying to support all this shit. So, you know, it's not as glamorous as it sounds.
So when you went to New York, was film front of mind, or were you just kind of going to, you had all these different creative pursuits and you were going to kind of see what stuck, or you wanted to do all of it?
I found out that film was really hard by making a couple of movies, and it was really scary to, you know, be on a rooftop with actors and shoot a film. And one of my first films, I had an Oricon. An Oricon is like it's like as big as half of a refrigerator, and that heavy. And it used to be a TV studio camera, and I remember holding it over a ledge and trying to get a point of view shot down, you know. And so it was kind of nerve-wracking. So then music is so good for the soul that I kind of enjoyed that and enjoyed acting for a while. And then it all came back because eventually, when I was in New York, I ran into people, and I heard that they pay people to read books and they pay people to see plays, and I thought that's a really good job if I could get that. And eventually I became a reader in New York. And at that time in New York, all the studios had story departments, and so I found myself reading primarily books for Paramount, for Warner Brothers, for Fox, for Universal. And some of the people I met, Donna Langley was there at that time. Donna Langley runs Universal now. And so we all kind of came up together, and books were really, really important at that time. And we had this small band of New Yorkers who got these manuscripts early, and Hollywood paid a lot of attention to us. And even though we all worked for different companies, we were all very cooperative with each other, because the enemy wasn't your rival company, the enemy was Hollywood, or the enemy was Los Angeles, and we were in New York, and you know, we wanted to get our voice known. So so that was a kind of a big period. That was like the John Grisham period of novels and books and manuscripts flying all over the place, and that was really my background in New York, having an early job in development, doing that.
And am I right that at that point that was also kind of the first big wave of independent film, which was so dominant in New York? Were there independent companies that were springing up that you were connecting with or working with at all?
Yeah, there was Ted Hope's company. There were a lot of independent companies that were springing up at that time, and that was a kind of a golden Jim Jarmusch and a lot of filmmakers. But you know, it was strange because even though I lived downtown and I was amongst independent filmmakers, I found myself, from reading for studios, I found myself kind of in a studio, more of a studio situation. So the material I was looking at was kind of divorced from Good Machine or other companies like that, who, you know, so even though if I did some acting or I did music, that would usually be associated with an independent film. But in terms of looking for material and being paid to do something that had to do with film, it was kind of, it was the mainstream companies.
Can you talk about, so the first big company that I think you landed with there was Tribeca Productions with De Niro and Jane Rosenthal. Can you talk about how that came about?
Yeah, I started at this company, Force 10, and Force 10 didn't have a deal. It was this guy John Roach. He had a film company. He had done some producing of theater. He had produced some of Craig Lucas's plays, and he had money to buy books. And I got a job there because I had learned word processing, and I got a job there inputting a script for him. And then he kept me on, and that was my first real job. I got cards made, said I was a story editor. I didn't know what a story editor was, but I learned about buying books there. And while I was there, I heard that Robert De Niro was going to start a production company, and Robert De Niro was my hero at the time. And I thought, well, I could never work for him. And then I heard he was meeting this person and that person. 6 months went by, so I sent a letter. I decided I had to do something just to be able to live with myself. And I had gone to this writers' colony called Yaddo, and I knew that De Niro's father had gone to Yaddo as a painter, and I had the La Mama gig, and I knew that he had done a play at La Mama. I had 4 things on a resume. That was basically it. I had nothing on a resume. And I put those down, but the best thing I did was I FedExed the letter. I put it in a FedEx envelope because I figured he'd think it's taxes or something and he'd have to open it. And somehow it got to him, and he called his assistant called that day and said he wanted to meet, and I met him. And so eventually, that led to me reading at Tribeca. I was kind of Tribeca's first reader. Jane Rosenthal was running the place at the time, but she hadn't been hired when I met De Niro. And so when I was reading at Tribeca, I mean, I remember one of the first scripts I read was Reservoir Dogs, Mr. Pink, Mr. Blue. I didn't, you know, what is this? It felt like something very new, very exciting. And then also they were making films. They had a deal with TriStar, and so I was really seeing a production company, a new production company. We were all kind of learning together in terms of being producers.
And then from Tribeca, how long were you there before moving to Spring Street?
At Tribeca, I was at Tribeca probably for 3 years, and then an opportunity came up with Spring Creek. These two very well-known producers, Mark Rosenberg and Paula Weinstein. Mark Rosenberg used to be the president of production at Warner Brothers. He ran Warner Brothers at 38 years old. He was a fantastic guy, and so I met him, and I thought really I was just trying to get leverage at Tribeca to have them take me more seriously. You know, you learn that you sometimes have to do things to. Lots of times, if you're in a company, I think this is generally true for life. You get into a work situation, and oftentimes how you're defined when you walk through the door is how they always see you. And sometimes you have to shake it up to get people to see you in the way you see yourself, or in the way you aspire to see yourself. And so there was a little bit of that going on at Tribeca, and I had just found this script that I wanted to do, and I brought it with me when I met Mark, and I had a great meeting with him, and I thought that was it. And then I called this friend who had set this up for me to meet him, and I said, well, he hasn't called. I guess he doesn't like me. And the guy said, well, have you sent a follow-up letter saying what a great interview it was and how much you enjoyed working for him? And I was like, no, are you supposed to do that? And so that's where I was at, okay, just so you know. And so then I did, and then he immediately offered me the job and said I had 24 hours to accept it. And I was like, Robert De Niro's going to be mad at me. I don't know what to do. You know, you can't say that. And he just laughed and laughed on the phone. He's like, that's your problem, man. That's not my problem. So that was a good the Hollywood, the high-level producer lesson right there. And so I did end up going to Spring Creek. And then I ended up running Spring Creek's New York office, again, primarily developing projects. And the script that I gave Mark in that first meeting was Analyze This. And Analyze This was I used to go to Naked Angels. Naked Angels was a theater company in Tribeca. A lot of well-known actors at that time ran the company, were part of that theater company, and they always had these great fundraisers, and at these fundraisers there'd usually be a really great one act or something like that, and I found out this guy, Kenny Lonergan, wrote a lot of those. And then, in time, Kenny Lonergan wrote a spec script. So Ken's first script was Analyze This, and I got a hold of it. And then as soon as I got it and wanted to do something with it, the agency that represented it went out of business overnight. But then eventually, through a long series of events, but the point is that that's the script that I found while I was at Tribeca. I knew Tribeca wasn't going to do it. That's the script that I brought to Mark, and because usually when you go for a job, they'll say, what do you want to do? What's your taste like? What is it that you want to do? And usually they'll want you to bring a script or something. And so I brought that script, and he fell in love with it, saw the potential of it, and that started my association there.
So De Niro wasn't too mad that you left?
They were, I don't know, because they wouldn't let me talk to De Niro from the moment that I said I was going. I got yelled at by his agent, and I was like, you're a millionaire yelling at me to try to better myself, you know, and, you know, I never imagined leaving Tribeca, but I did, and eventually it all worked out because De Niro wasn't really ready to do that movie when I first brought it to Tribeca, but through a long development process, that movie took 6 years to get made. By the time we got that script in shape, and I was I was already in Los Angeles. By that time, 5 years later, De Niro was ready to do that movie. And so, ironically, I ended up at a table read between Spring Creek and Tribeca with Analyze This. So that's what happened.
That was an incredible, it feels like that was a real turning point for his career as well, right? I mean, introducing him comedically in a real way.
Yeah, people said, I mean, I didn't think it was that big of a leap. I mean, people said, can Robert De Niro do comedy? I knew he could do comedy if you saw the Brian De Palma films, and of course he can do comedy. He can do anything. He's like a fantastic actor. And so I didn't think that was that big a leap, but it did. He did say that, he did tell me afterwards that his price jumped pretty significantly, more than since The Godfather Part 2. So that felt really good. And then it did open the door to Jay Roach's films. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it worked out well for Robert De Niro.
So from Spring Creek, you moved to HBO, and you know, in introducing you, I kind of called out some of the many, many films that you've made there. Can you talk about, I mean, just in general terms, I don't know, like how does it work at HBO Films in terms of when you're looking for content, when you're putting things together? What is your process? And I'm sure it's evolved over time, but what is it like?
Well, you know, HBO is a little unusual because, I mean, you hear everything about algorithms these days, but HBO is still a place, even in this transition phase, that goes a lot on the gut of the people working there. And I think that with all material, and probably the material that all of you work with, you need some spark inside, you need some relatability, you need something that turns you on about it to allow you to keep going back to it and keep working at it, because I know there's a lot of writers out there, and we know how important rewriting is and revising is and taking notes. And so, you know, my process is, you know, I've basically run through my ideas because I'm old and I've gone through my ideas, and I need other people's ideas, you know? And so I'm just looking for things that are different, but you just want relatability, and you want a story that has an opportunity to first break out of the crowd and have some emotional resonance with an audience. I mean, for me, emotional resonance is one of the most important things. And then the other thing at HBO Films is that we like to subvert expectations. So, you know, if somebody says, you know, how are you going to make a movie about hanging chads and dimpled chads, and, you know, it sounds so boring, we make Recount, and we subvert the expectation that that's going to be some documentary or something like that, and try to make that into an entertaining film. We don't want to make history lessons. We don't want to make medicine. We don't want to make things that are good for you. We're making films, and we're making entertainment, and hopefully we're making projects that have cultural impact. So, you know, cultural impact, things that matter. And frankly, as all of you know, you have to spend years of your life on a project, so you better relate to it in a very fundamental way from the inside, or else it's not going to be a fun experience. And you know, this overused term passion, I'll just say that, you know, there's a reason that some cliches are true, and passion is really important, whether it's a limited series or a continuing series. It is important when you get in front of executives that you show a real, genuine passion, and I know that that's what all of us look for, and at HBO, you know, story is king, the creators are kings and queens, and we're just looking for something that is really meaningful to filmmakers and that we think that can connect to an audience.
I want to go back to something you just said about how you don't want the films that you make should not feel like medicine or like education, and they don't, clearly. They're highly entertaining and emotionally engaging, but you have made a lot of films that deal with either current events or historical events that are still relevant today, from Recount to Game Change to Confirmation. Can you talk a bit more about that, of like how what drives you to those stories? And
well, I think mainstream filmmaking, the films that the studios are making, and generally story choices have caught up with what HBO's been doing for a long time. And honestly, it's pretty simple. You're looking for the best stories. And what I've found is that many times in nonfiction-based stories, as bases of narrative, those are incredible stories. I mean, they're so incredible that sometimes you can't really do it exactly the way it really went down because nobody would believe it. So you got to pull back a little bit. But those are simply the best stories. And if you look at the what's been nominated for Academy Awards and what's been going on and with the studios in terms of prestige films, you'll see that many of them are actually true stories. And so it wasn't a calculated thing, even though HBO had done a lot of it in the past. If somebody comes in with a story about Jack Kevorkian and assisted suicide, now setting aside whether or not that's too much of a downer, and maybe it would be too much of a downer for a studio, but actually when you start looking into the story, there's actually a lot of hope in it. There's a lot of humor in it. There's a lot of gonzo, crazy shit in that story, and also that's a story where when I thought about it when it first came in, because Kevorkian was going to be released from prison, I thought, wow, there's scenes. If you do this right, there's scenes in this movie that you've never seen in cinema before. So that's a part of a calculation. The other calculation to me, and this started from Warner Brothers days, our deal was at Warner Brothers, Spring Creek, for most of the time I was at Warner Brothers, is that you're looking for characters that are going to be attractive to great directors and great actors. And so using Kevorkian, You Don't Know Jack, this movie, I just thought that, well, if we develop this script, even if we hit it 70%, it's going to be something completely different. It's going to be something you have to pay attention to whether you want to do it or not, and it's going to be a role that no one's ever played before. And that role is going to get us a great actor. And if we get a great actor, that's going to help me greenlight the movie. And that's not a bad way to think. I mean, that's really kind of what it's about. You need to put elements together that make people want to invest money. So we did. We got the script to a certain point, and Al Pacino wanted to do it. And so that's the first movie that I made with Al. I made 3 movies with Al. So that was part of the selection process for me. Originality, a bold statement, standing out from the crowd, and potentially a great role and a great story.
You used the phrase cultural impact a moment ago, and it strikes me these movies, they really do have a huge cultural impact, or they have the potential to, in a way, right? More people are going to be exposed to Anita Hill through Confirmation, I mean, today at this point, than are going to be reading the historical records of what went down in that process, or it can really seriously have a cultural impact. Is that something that you're thinking about, like, when you're selecting or when you're in the marketing of the films at all? Is that something you're...
It's a hard thing to predict, cultural impact. You hope that it's kind of in the DNA of the aesthetic. And so just going back to You Don't Know Jack, we didn't know that there was going to be this whole debate about health care and, firing squads for your grandparents and all that stuff. When we did Confirmation, we just felt that it was time for that story to be looked at again. We felt that there was a better story to be told about what happened to Anita Hill, and and that story does pretty much explain everything you're seeing in the news about Joe Biden right now. So it's not to simplify stories and make simple heroes and villains, but it's to humanize both sides and try to understand both sides. And our best version is let the audience decide. You decide where you want to, what side you want to come off on. So cultural impact, I mean, it's a funny thing because unless it's key to a presidential election or something like that, you don't really know what's going to catch on. And how could you predict it anyway? Because you don't know when a script is going to be ready, and it takes 2 years to get a film going. But again, if you believe in it and it has cultural significance to you, then you might get lucky and it might click.
I look forward to seeing whatever HBO comes up with dealing with our current political universe.
It's a
Can't
tough
imagine.
one. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I mean, that's, I don't know what to say.
I just picture you throwing scripts over your shoulder like, well, that one doesn't work anymore.
I've seen a lot, and no, I mean, we literally went to the Republican convention. I mean, Jay Roach and I were at the Republican convention. We thought, you're chasing this thing, and it just continually evolves, and honestly, that there's a great story. There's been a lot of great books. There's a lot of projects that are out there that nip away at what's been going on, and we're making a miniseries now. Plot Against America, David Simon's company is making it, and that's a Philip Roth book that tells the story of what would have happened if Lindbergh had defeated FDR. And Lindbergh is the original America First guy. Lindbergh is is somebody who was an isolationist, and it really takes you through, and it. The difference between that and today's reality is that Philip Roth thought you needed an incredible American hero to gain the presidency, and but instead we see that mass media and television stars and certain notoriety can actually put you in the position where you have a chance to win the nomination and win the election, maybe with a little help. Win the election, and so that's the state we're in. So in terms of what that movie or miniseries would be, I couldn't begin to tell you yet. I'm just finished reading the Mueller report, and I would just say everybody should read the Mueller report, because if you like the books that came out on the Trump administration and how entertaining they were, this is another book that just came out, and it's got some interesting stuff in it. Part 2's better than part 1, but they're both pretty good.
So you've spoken about the types of material that you're drawn to. Can you talk a bit also about the directors that you work with? You work with some incredibly seasoned, established filmmakers like Steven Soderbergh and Jay Roach. You also work with new people, like when Dee Reese did Bessie, that was right after Pariah. You've acquired some films by first-time directors as well. Can you talk, what's your process how do you know if a director is the right person for it? Are you developing the project and then bringing on a director? Or do you sometimes bring on a director and then talk to them about what sort of material they'd want to do?
It happens in all kinds of ways. With Bessie, Dee was, I had hired Dee to rewrite the script. And Dee brought a lot of, again, passion. Her work ethic is unbelievable, and a lot of inspirational stuff to the movie. And I just felt that, and Dee and I talked, and I said, look, to have and Queen Latifah was already attached to the project. So, I told Dee the best way to have a shot at directing the movie is to nail the script. And she nailed the script, and that then opened the door for a conversation with Queen Latifah, and there needed to be a trust there because it was, you know, if you've seen the movie, it's not a lightweight film, and Dee didn't write it to be a lightweight film, and it gets into a lot of stuff, and it really calls for a great performance, and Latifah had to really decide if she wanted to go there and then trust a young filmmaker. Because a lot of things with young filmmakers is, you know, they have to have the trust of, if they're working with more established actors, you know. And that came to be, and so that's how that happened. But it happens in all kinds of ways. We acquired Cher, Pippa Bianco, first film after winning the Academy Award for her short. Native Son, that we have out now, Rashid Johnson, those are both first films. And you can clap. Native Son, yeah, Native Son. So, thank you on behalf of Rashid. And so those were projects that were produced independently, and they figured out a way, found a way to get the movie made, and then we acquired those films. So it happens in all kinds of ways, but you know, if you don't have filmmakers making first films, you don't have a future for filmmaking. So it's really important.
Yeah. Well, you know, talking about those acquisitions leads me to my next question, which is really broader, but kind of about I mean, it feels like we're at just this pivotal turning point for film and television and visual storytelling, where everything is changing. You know, there's all these new digital platforms, there's cord cutting, there's what's going on with theatrical. And I'm curious, I mean, this is a huge question to throw to you, but kind of how you see this moment. Will you be doing more acquisitions as part of your role at HBO? And now that you're overseeing Miniseries and Cinemax as well, how does that change your, like, I mean, you have a lot on your plate, but are you restructuring things, like looking at a different approach to your work, or are you going to have the kind of the same approach, but just on a bigger scale?
Yes, there's
That's
a lot
like
more.
8 questions.
There's a lot more to do, and first of all, in terms of limited series or miniseries, the way it's organized at HBO, if you want to bring things to HBO, Francesco Orsi, who runs drama at HBO under Casey Blois, he's the head of all programming. She's looking at material that is fiction-based. So, for instance, Big Little Lies was a novel that would be on her side. And I'm looking at things that are nonfiction based. So it's all narrative, it's all dramatic narrative, it's more about what's the source material. So there might be exceptions to the rules, like for instance, Plot Against America is a novel, but it's based on a what-if historical story. So things move back and forth a little bit, but generally speaking, that's the division at HBO. And how do I see the state of things now in terms of what we're looking for?
Yeah.
There will be more acquisitions. We kind of opened the door. We had been going to festivals for the last number of years and wanted the community to look at us as buyers, even though we hadn't bought anything. Because frankly, we didn't see anything we really wanted. One of the first movies that I would have wanted to buy, which I thought would have been great for us, was Fruitvale Station, Ryan Coogler's film. But then after that, the movie we finally did acquire was The Tale, Jennifer Fox's film. And it's an incredible film, and it's about a really tough subject matter done in a completely unique storytelling way. And so we bought that film, and it was a great success for us. So that kind of opened the door, like, gee, acquisitions aren't so bad. Maybe you don't have to make all these movies. And everybody's doing it, because you basically, today, you have to do everything. You have to acquire, you have to develop, because you know, there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of great stuff out there, and stuff gets made in all different kinds of ways. So there will be more acquisitions. There still will be films that we develop, but what the mix is, I don't know. I got to get through Deadwood first. Deadwood, yeah.
Let's talk about
It's
Deadwood.
coming.
So another kind of large question about the current moment we're in. Obviously, we're in the middle of hopefully a huge correction when it comes to issues of diversity and representation in film. Definitely a big conversation. The reports keep coming out with these horrible statistics of how many filmmakers of color, how many women directors are working and not working, all of that. I'm curious if you want to weigh in on that from your role at HBO, how you see that, how you address that in your own work. I mean, you've worked with some incredible filmmakers from all different backgrounds. How do you find talent? How do you work with them?
Well, the talent is out there, and you know, the way I've been talking about diversity for a while now, because it's been true for a while now, is you know, even if you want to set aside ethics and altruism and kumbaya and all that stuff, forget about it. You don't have to talk about that. You could just talk, you know, hard facts. You could just talk about how the audience is diversifying. You could talk about how it's a more profitable situation for the financiers and for the studios and various production companies. You could talk about the fact that if you don't start appealing to the audience that's out there and appeal to that audience with authentic stories that are made by who the audience is, you're going to be left behind. So I think that that's a pretty good argument. Now, that's an argument that usually works in business, right? If you look at media as a business, that's the bottom line argument that business people like to hear. And the statistics are all there in terms of who is spending the money and what the diversity stats are about who is watching. So, if that's out there, and it's been out there a few years, and still things aren't changing as fast as everybody would want them to, you have to start looking at other things. And you know, I just think that you know, this term unconscious bias is a very real thing, and people are comfortable with other people who are of their own tribe, whatever that tribe might be. And I think that the more awareness of that, the more you can start change things in little ways just like blind resumes, say, for instance. And the whole rainforest, the whole infrastructure has to change in order for the statistics, for the diversity statistics to change. You know, things have to change in the agencies, things have to change in the studio structures, things have to change with the executives. There has to be more access to opportunities with the writers and with the filmmakers, and so it's not where it should be, but what I would say that is positive and hopeful is that this is not a strange thing to be talking about now. It is on the agenda. People have gotten the memo. Mm-hmm. People understand. People are looking. There are opportunities out there, and you know, my opinion is you take advantage of those opportunities. You know, if there's an opportunity, and it has to do with diversity, you should take advantage of that opportunity, because people need that, they want that, and I think that the powers that be recognize that and are asking for that from their employees and executives and creative people. So everybody can do better, but I do sense that everybody is really trying in a concerted effort now, and I'm hopeful that it may not be happening as fast as we want it to happen, but it is happening.
Great. Len Amato.